Hi, John. Welcome to the full story.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get straight into a question that will give us a very clear sense of where you think America's headed under Donald Trump. And that's the midterms. It's a really crucial election coming up, perhaps a true referendum on how Americans feel about Donald Trump's rule. But do you think they're going to be free and fair?
You know, that is a question everyone asks here in America as well. And my view is we cannot predict the future, and we can only worry about things that we can control. And so, to the extent that we need to be filing lawsuits if there is an attack from the administration on election infrastructure, we should do that. To the extent that we have to, give people some sort of extra confidence that the more they show up and the bigger the margin in the midterms, the harder it's going to be for Donald Trump to create any confusion or chaos, then we should do that. But beyond that, I think what we have going for us is the system of federalism, which is that the national government here does not run the elections. The elections are run by the states, and so that makes it much more difficult for the federal government to mess around. Of course, there's a number of things that we that we all worry about here, which is there's a large unaccountable paramilitary force roaming the streets of American cities right now. So you worry about Trump sending ICE or other federal agents around election polling places, even though that is explicitly forbidden, to intimidate people. You worry about, I actually worry about most about what happens after the election. If there are close races in certain districts, in certain states, then, and there are recounts and all that, then you worry about Donald Trump and his allies sowing chaos.
So that's where the
Um,
danger could be if things are close.
to me, it's that is where the danger is close races where the House is decided by a couple of very, very close races, or the Senate, and then Trump steps in.
I understand there's, the option of filing lawsuits. We don't want to quite predict the future, but Donald Trump has most recently been talking about nationalizing elections. I mean, do you think there might be a plan to prepare to rig the midterms, especially as the Trump administration, has a bit of a recent history of not necessarily listening to court orders, not
Hmm.
necessarily following the rules?
Yeah, I don't. With him, you never know. It's hard to know what he meant by nationalizing because they're not nationalized, and no bill would ever pass Congress that would nationalize any elections. And so I'm not quite sure how he would do that. Of course, after 2020, there was a discussion within the then first Trump administration about seizing voting machines. So there is that concern, of course. Um, I feel somewhat confident that in many of the swing districts and swing states, there are Democratic governors in those states. So I think that makes his job tougher. Not impossible, but tougher. So I think there are a number of, I'll put it this way. I think he would like to, for sure. I think his motivation is to do so. Whether he will be successful in doing so is another question, and I do think he faces a number of obstacles in that regard.
Fair enough. I mean, that FBI raid on Fulton County, Georgia, the seizure of the
Yes.
2020 election records, that must have been concerning for you, such a deliberate
Yeah.
move by the FBI. I mean, what did that signal to you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's two reasons that he is doing that. One is a backwards looking reason, which is he still believes he won in 2020, or at least wants people to believe that he won in 2020, and so he wants to relitigate that. And of course, if the federal government is seizing ballots from the 2020 election, who knows what they'll say they found. But there's also a concern looking forward where, and maybe this is where both of them come into play together, which is, oh, we found these ballots and it turns out 2020 was rigged after all. And so now we want to send, federal observers to Fulton County to oversee the elections. And again, this all would have to be litigated through the court system. And while we do have a, very conservative Supreme Court, in election matters, at least election matters like with this import, it has been difficult for Trump to find a majority on the court for some of his crazier election moves.
So there's still some barriers there at work, some friction amongst government departments and different branches of government. You mentioned the federal agents, and we're in Australia here. We obviously watch what's happening in the US very closely, and that footage of the ICE agents shooting two US citizens practically point blank in Minnesota, that was very confronting for us all the way over the Pacific Ocean. I mean, what effect did that have on you when you first heard of that?
It's horrifying. It's probably one of the more horrifying things I've seen in American politics in my lifetime. Um, and you mentioned the elections, but I do think like what keeps me up at night and what has kept me up at night since Trump took office again is what's going on with ICE and what's going on with these federal agents, because we have seen that they feel like they are unaccountable. They have a budget now the size of the Israeli military. They are sloppy in their recruitment and training, and they get court orders all the time to release someone that they have arrested or jailed, and sometimes they don't follow the court order. And clearly, when they killed Renee Good, and then the administration basically said, federal agents have immunity to do whatever they want. Of course, we should expect that they would kill again because they don't worry that they're going to get punished or held accountable for using too much force. Their worry is that they will, could lose their jobs or be held accountable for not making enough arrests, because Stephen Miller, the president's top advisor and maybe the most powerful person in the federal government after Donald Trump, has been demanding 3,000 arrests per day, which is they're even with Stephen Miller, demanding that, they're not achieving it. And so you have an unaccountable police force that's made up of increasingly more right-wing, fundamentalist, very ideologically extreme people, and they are roaming free. Now, the good news, if there's good news, in the wake of Alex Preddy's murder by these agents, the public outcry was so great that Trump has felt a little pressure to back down a little bit, and Tom Homan, who is now the new federal official in charge of ICE, just announced today they're drawing down about 700 agents from Minnesota, and so there's still way too many, way too many.
Exactly, yeah. There's still, Mays leaves about 2,000 left.
Right, but they are running up against the fact that people in Minneapolis, people all over the country, but especially in Minneapolis, have courageously been out there on the streets, people who are not necessarily activists or organizers and are just doing this for the first time of their lives, out there filming what's happening to make sure that and basically bearing witness to what the government is doing to make sure that the rest of the country knows. And public opinion, which has not been on their side on this issue for quite some time, is now quite lopsided against the administration over this.
Did you expect something like that after Trump won his second term?
I did. I mean, I don't know if I expected it to be this extreme this quickly, but knowing Stephen Miller's background and what he believes about immigration and what he believes about this country and how Trump feels and Stephen Miller feels and JD Vance feels about protest in this country and dissent, I did worry that this would happen. I don't know if I believed it would happen so soon, but this was always my biggest fear of a second Trump term.
You're Obama's former head speechwriter. You're a Democratic Party insider. With everything that's going on, I assumed the Democrats would nationally become really popular. And I was very surprised to look at some of the recent polls that still have the Democratic Party in the 30s in favorability. That's meant to be quite low. I mean, what are they doing wrong?
How much time do we have? So, look, I'll start with what is normal, right? Which is we have no leader of the party right now. We are a leaderless party. And some of that is just because, we lost the last election. We don't have an obvious nominee. we're going to head into a contentious primary in 2028, which in some ways would be a good thing. But until then, the leaders of the party are the leaders in the Senate and the House, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, both of whom are, you could debate how
How
good of
charismatic
tacticians
they
they
are.
are within their caucuses, right? But in terms of like public
Mm.
communicators and charisma, not so much. I don't think anyone would rank them at the top of any list. So therefore, you don't have a single voice in the party. You don't have a single leader, and I think that has hurt us. I also think that, look, we are now 10 years into this in the Trump era, and um, you lose once to Trump, and you try to say, okay, maybe it's an aberration, maybe I just got something wrong, and then Biden wins, and then we lose again to Trump. I think that a lot of Democratic politicians no longer trust their instincts about politics and about what the country wants and about what to say. And sometimes I think they are taking too much advice from looking for in too many different places. And I always think that sometimes when they're talking about politics, it's like they're sort of reading the stage directions on this is what I'm supposed to say about this, and this is what people want to hear about this. And I worry that we don't have anyone right now that is sort of telling the larger story of where America is and where it should go and what this country should be in 2026 after a decade of Trump.
I want to pick up on that a bit, but do you think the Democrats have taken responsibility for the last loss to Donald Trump? And so they can move on?
I think some have. I think others not so much. It was a mix of we ran a candidate who was too old to be running for president, and who had presided over a level of inflation that look the rest of the world dealt with as well. But when everything's more expensive and the guy running the country can't really communicate effectively about where he wants to take the country and what he's achieved and what he has left to achieve, then and the country's already fairly divided, that's a tough position to put the party in. Now, what lessons can you take from that as Democrats? Well, don't preside over skyrocketing inflation is one. But also, I also think that the way that Biden handled the border was a mistake as well. And so Democrats are learning from that. And, it remains to be seen whether Democrats have learned the lessons of 2024. And we will know that, I think, not necessarily in the midterms, because midterms are more of a referendum on the party in power, but we will certainly learn that as we head into the 2028 primaries on the Democratic side.
I mean, I don't want to look back too much. We will look forward. But there was some reporting around the awareness that Pod Save America had about Joe Biden's decline in April 2024. A meeting, John Lovett said that your colleague said that he struggled about whether to speak out. I mean, do you reflect on that and think that perhaps things could be done differently? What's that big lesson there?
Yeah, the tricky part is a lot of people were concerned, but the inner circle around Biden was the inner circle, and everyone who was concerned would be told, "Don't worry, he was tired, he's this, he's that," and we were pretty honest about that whenever we talked about it, but we just didn't know how bad it was, and then certainly, I think at least on Pod Save America, we had seen him maybe a week before the debate, the infamous debate at a fundraiser in Los Angeles. We saw Biden, and he was quite bad. It was the George Clooney fundraiser that has become somewhat famous now. And he was quite bad at that fundraiser, and we were quite alarmed. But at the time, we thought, okay, well, the debate is in a week, and he either does great in the debate, and maybe he was just really tired again, and he'd flown across the world and whatever, or he'll be quite bad at the debate, and then everyone will know. But it's only a week and a half away, so we'll just hang tight. And then I think that is why, after the debate, when he did so poorly, and a lot of Democrats were still defending Joe Biden and still saying he should stay in the race, we were like, we can't do that. We can't just go along. We have to
And
be
you did.
honest.
To be
Yeah.
fair, you did come out and say we need a new candidate. But I guess just what's the lesson there? Would you do anything differently?
You know, what would I do differently? I mean, I would probably, I guess I would yell more about it on the pod, but they weren't big fans of us, and it wasn't that they weren't big, like
You mean the Biden
they were
team?
the Biden team. They were upset with us for long before we spoke out after the debate because they didn't think we were nice enough to Joe Biden, and that, he didn't. They wouldn't put him on Pod Save America. So we could have yelled more, but I don't know that it would have made a difference for them. And I think that's true for a lot of people in the Democratic Party. I think that it took Chuck Schumer going to Biden's house at the very end and basically showing him the polling that his advisors wouldn't show him and begging him to
Mm.
think of the country, to finally get him to drop out. And so, like, when you're at that kind of extreme measure, you realize that people speaking out before that might not have made as much of a difference.
John, let's look forward.
Mm.
You've talked about the Democratic Party needing a story to tell, trying to figure out where they sit in America. And I wonder why we're not seeing radical, really progressive policies coming out of the Democratic Party. Are they really failing on that front, or are they just failing to communicate it?
Look, I think because the Democratic Party isn't just one entity, and you have, because we have a two-party system in the Democratic Party, you have people on the far left and you have people on the center left. And so you have very progressive policies proposed by some people in the Democratic Party, and then other people you don't have policies as progressive. So I do think one area of agreement between maybe the left of the party and the center left of the party is this focus on the fact that most people in this country right now can't afford the basic necessities of life. They can't afford housing, can't afford childcare, groceries are too expensive, and we are heading into a massive transformation with artificial intelligence that's going to make this situation even more difficult for people, and is going to make the job situation more difficult for most people in this country. And I think there is an anger in this country bordering on disgust with the billionaire class and elite institutions who seem to be doing fine, and while most people are working very, very hard and can't seem to get ahead. And so I think you have a confluence you have people agreeing about that on all sides of the party. And I think the question of, like, what policy solutions we have for that is going to be debated in 2028.
But those challenges from America that you just set out, it makes it even more extraordinary to me that the Democratic Party is not gaining support on that. I was looking at an Ipsos poll,
Mm.
and it was showing that Americans disapprove of the way Trump is handling the cost of living, but
Yeah.
Americans are still split on whether the Democratic Party could do a better job. I find that astonishing.
Yeah. Well, so here's why. Um, the Democratic Party is shut out of power, right? Don't control the House, don't control the Senate, don't control the White House. And so if you're a typical American, you are not an avid news consumer. You're not following along very closely. And so what you see in the news is Donald Trump doing things that you don't agree with. But you hear Democrats, to the extent that you hear Democrats, you hear them criticizing Donald Trump and saying how bad it is what Donald Trump is doing. It's difficult for Democrats to break through right now with a positive vision. I think some of that gets taken care of as we head into a primary season where the locus of the debate, that the national debate, becomes, okay, which of these Democratic candidates are we going to nominate for president? And let's debate their policy platforms and what they stand for, right? So you get a little more attention there. But between now and then, I think it's very hard for Democrats to break through. Now, that's not to excuse Democratic politicians for not coming up with creative enough, bold enough policy solutions and visions that would break through, right? Like, I do think there's a lack of creativity and boldness there, but I do think they're facing a lot of constraints as well.
Are the Democrats afraid, do you think, to go down the Bernie Sanders, the Zoran Mandani route of really profound policy change? I mean, Zoran Mandani is talking about rent freezes and state-run grocery shops.
Yeah, there is some of that, and look, I think the electorate here is a bit more moderate, particularly in the states and districts that you need to win a majority. And so, but look, I think even if you're talking about Mamdani, right? State-run grocery stores, or city locally run grocery stores, even though he proposed 5 as a test run. But just to take it as an example, I think if you polled that, it would not be very popular here with most voters, especially most voters in swing states. But then there are very populist economic policies, like I think universal health care now is it has been popular here for a while and is very popular, including Medicare for all. Is rising in popularity. I think building a ton more housing and making housing more affordable, like these are extremely popular policies. And so I do want to see Democratic candidates coming up with like very ambitious policy proposals that are not necessarily like super complicated for people. Like I think that sometimes people just want to hear like, you know what, if you want to work, there's gonna be a job for you, and if you get a job, you're gonna be able to afford to live somewhere, and you're gonna be able to afford to see a doctor if you get sick, and if something really bad happens to you and you really need medical care that costs a lot of money, you're gonna be able to be taken care of as well. And if both people in the family want to work, we're gonna make sure that there's childcare that you can afford for your kids. Like this is just, and our policies are gonna do that, right? And
So,
like that.
so you think the Democratic Party is failing to do that at the moment?
Yeah, I think in a way that's breaking through, certainly. Just based on the polls that you were just citing, like clearly that's not breaking through to people.
Well, do you think we're going to see a shift there? Are you urging the party to shift there?
I am urging the party, I'm urging people to, this is what I always think about with candidates. Put down the polls, uh, like stop listening to us, reading all the pundits and watching all this. Like, look around at the country. Think about what's happening. Think about how you feel about what's happening. Think about why you got into public service and what kind of country you want to live in, to leave to your children, what kind of country you want the rest of the world to see, and speak about that country and speak about it passionately and speak about like how you're going to get us there. That's what I want.
I just want to end on a broader vision that you're coming to Australia and New Zealand for a tour. It's called
Mm.
Hopefully Just Visiting. Makes me feel like you think you're not going to be allowed back into
I
America.
was going to say, yeah, if you'll, we might need an exit strategy. So,
Yeah, let us know if you need some help there. But part of it is part of that tour is to talk about that global spread of right wing authoritarianism, and I wonder
yeah.
for Australia, just before we finish, what are the lessons here for us? We have a centre left government in charge. We have growing inequality. We do
Mm.
have compulsory voting. But we do have also growing popularity of a party called One Nation, and it's a far right party, anti immigration, doing very well in the polls. We have a divided conservative landscape here as well. What message do you have for progressive politicians in Australia to say this is how you can avoid the mistakes that
Mm.
the Democrats have made?
Yeah. So I think part of it is there's a tension between um promising what you think voters want to hear about rising inequality and being able to deliver on that promise. And I think if you are not ambitious enough in what you propose and how you talk about the problem of inequality and the problem of what people are going through, if you're not ambitious enough, then people think, eh, you're not going to do anything for me. And so maybe this other party that's telling me my problems are the fault of people who don't look like me or come from where I come from or don't speak the language. I should just go with them. So that's one problem. That's one way that you get towards Trump. I think the other challenge is you campaign in a way where you offer these ambitious, bold policy proposals. You talk about inequality, and then once you get into office, you just can't deliver. And you always sort of knew that you couldn't deliver because you know that politics can be messy and difficult and slow, but you kind of say it anyway because you're just trying to get through the campaign. I think that is another way that you end up with right wing authoritarians because they prey on people's distrust in institutions and the failure of institutions to deliver on what they have promised to deliver. And so I think that I think you need to be bold and ambitious, but also realistic in what you can achieve and be constantly communicating with voters about what you're doing, why you're doing it, why you might have failed to deliver on something that you promised, what you're going to try to do next time, how you're going to fight harder. Because I think that in this information environment, the days of, okay, thank you for your vote, I'm going to go govern, and I'll come back to you at the next election. Hopefully, you'll be happy with what we did, and that's that. Those days are over. I don't even think they were ever around, but like they're certainly over now. And so I think you need to govern like you are campaigning in the sense that the communication structure that you have during a campaign needs to be up and running and very powerful and compelling while you're governing.
To drown out other voices, essentially.
And to drown them out and also just to answer them, to debate them. I think the other thing that we did wrong is, oh, Donald Trump is so offensive and so crazy, and this brand of politics is so extreme, the country would never go for that. We actually have to make the case for why the system of government we have is good for people. Like, like because people might be choosing between an authoritarian government and a democratic government, and you can't assume that everyone's going to say, "Oh yeah, democracy is good, so of course we want democracy." You have to say, "Okay, this is why it is better for you and your family than this other government." Because that is the other side of the spectrum right now, and you need an argument, and you need to be arguing with those people and debating them.
John, it's a febrile time in Australia here, and I think a lot of politicians will be listening to your message as well. You and other members of Pod Save America are in Australia at the end of next week for your tour. Very best of luck with that, and thank you so much for talking to us today.
Can't wait to be there. So thank you for having me.